Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unitix Not Politics presents The Nation's Voice. I'm your moderator, William T. Greer, and I want to thank you for taking time out today to join us for this very important conversation. We're talking today about race and politics in America. Now, before we launch into our discussion, I want to give you a few opening remarks and talk a little bit today about master status. Now, if you're not a sociologist, as I'm not, let's talk a little bit about I'll define first what master status is. And master status is that social position that is the primary identifying characteristic of an individual. And often of such exceptional importance for a social identification as to shape the life outcome. So some labels that we may see as master status may have to do with ethnicity or race or job identification. It really depends upon someone's situation and how they view themselves, and very importantly, how they're viewed by society at large. And so this brings us to this idea of labeling and labels. And labels, such as the master status, they're very useful when those definitions are clear and when they're used to facilitate understanding. When labels become dangerous, or when they start to supplant true and meaningful master status. And, some of that meaningful master status are things like American and human being, for instance. And when we begin to replace those things with somewhat arbitrary labels in terms of politics, for instance, such as Republican or Democrat or racial identification, that's when these things can become divisive. Politics is passionate. People are passionate about the things that they believe in and their political values and their priorities. Disagreement in politics is also a natural thing because we're all different. What is natural in a mature democracy is disagreement, and sometimes that can be desirable if we're able to manage that. If we're able to manage that well. That process can be subverted when emotions lead to intolerance, and that intolerance then inhibits our ability to have peaceful conversation about those differences between us. Peaceful conversation is important for us to be able to resolve political differences, and when peaceful conversation fails, it leaves only one alternative, and that alternative is pretty obvious. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best when he said that violence is the voice of the unheard. And you're seeing some of that play out across America today. So the nation's voice is all about peaceful discussion, peaceful and tolerant discussion of our differences. And so we seek to have a diverse panel so that we can have those discussions. So our goal when we have this discussion is to interact with each other and listen and seek to understand those differences even before maybe we seek to be understood. So with that, let's go ahead and launch into our discussion, and I'll start by introducing our panel today. We'll start with Doug. And Doug, if you'll go ahead and turn on your camera and give a wave to the audience.
I'll figure it out here in a second.
All right, thank you, Doug. While Doug's figuring that out, I'll go ahead and introduce our next panelist, Mike.
Actually, Jade has turned me off, so looks like Jade has to turn me on.
All right. Well, Jade does that sometimes. She loves the control. So, all right. Make sure you do those kickbacks. That's how you get your camera turned on time. Our next panelist is Gabe. Gabe, you want to wave and say hi to the audience?
Hello.
All right. And then we have one more panelist, last but by no means least, Beth. Hi, Beth. Thank you. And thank you, panelists, for joining again. Appreciate everybody taking time out. So we're going to jump in, and we're kind of picking up where we left off. This is the second in our series, and of course, we started some good conversation last time. So I want to kind of set the stage. On our previous panel, there were some panelists that indicated that it's inappropriate to comment on the experiences of certain groups unless you're a member of that group. The reasoning was that unless you were a member of that particular group, you couldn't possibly understand the experiences of that group, and therefore your chances of having a valid comment were diminished. so you couldn't understand how that group might feel about those experiences because you hadn't walked in their shoes. Now, not all the panelists agreed, but some audience members agreed with that. So before we launch into the conversation, I kind of want to understand where each of our panelists stand. So I'm going to ask each of you very quickly to raise your hand if you agree with that sentiment, that unless you are a member of a particular group, you don't have a valid commentary on the experiences of that group. Can I see a raise of hands if you agree with that statement? I see Beth's hand up. I see Gabe Gabe, were you equivocating? Are you, so you're halfway there. Mike, I couldn't tell. Looked like you might have moved a little bit there. All right. So it looks like that, like there's some diverse opinions on the panel. So let me now then set up the question. So for those of you who don't agree with that sentiment, let's start there. Tell us why not. And Doug, you were the one who didn't even move. So I'm going to start with you, and then and panelists after Doug's comments, please jump in, and please remember to limit individual comments to 2 minutes or less. Doug?
Well, I don't think you necessarily have to have walked, and you know, that old adage of, you know, you walk a mile in my shoes. My background is, of course, as I think Gabe and Elvin and others listening know, you know, 33 years in the Army, and the diversity, despite what you might hear in the media and elsewhere, the diversity in the military exceeds our society. And that's a very positive thing. So I've walked many miles and eaten the same dust as fellow members of my society, of our society, who are of all races and nationalities. So and I've heard, you know, their views on things that are affecting our nation today. And then being a white kid growing up on an Indian reservation, that really was in my formative years, had a huge impact on me. So no, I don't agree that you have to have lived the lifestyle or the life of an individual, regardless of ethnicity. But if you've shared their life and they've shared their life with you, then I think you can understand them.
Thank you, Doug. Beth, I'd love to hear from you. You were the most firm in agreeing.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I agree that the issue, I mean, intersectionality is really important. Empathy is really important. I think proximity to a specific issue can give you more information, but, you know, last year I ended up in a wheelchair for quite a few weeks. And one of the things I noticed right away is that if you are in a wheelchair without a visible injury, you are accepted as a handicapped person. And just noticing the way that people looked at me or avoided their gaze or spoke to me indicated to me very clearly that there is an aspect to lived experience that simply can't be substituted for watching something from the outside, even if you empathize deeply with it. And so as a woman, it also makes me really angry when men want to talk about understanding what it is to be a woman. Unless you've lived inside it, there's just such a huge amount of nuance that you can't get unless you live it. And so speaking with empathy, offering relatability, those things are important. Listening, but I think the most important thing is still listening and not just asserting like, I do understand. So I feel like we're supposed to listen to people who tell us that we can't understand their experience and try. And I think that we have the obligation to discuss with other members of dominant culture amongst ourselves rather than asking the marginalized people to educate us further about those things.
All right, others. Mike and Gabe, you were kind of, you know, various degrees of halfway there. Let's hear from you.
Go ahead, Mike.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I like a lot of aspects of what you're saying, Beth, just in terms of that empathy component. I think that's pretty important. I think for me, it really depends on what the comments are that we have about the group that we're speaking about. So to me, I mean, I think it depends on the nature of the comments. You know, like I feel like there's certain criteria that we would want to have about those comments. Like, are they amplifying the voices of marginalized groups? Are they challenging systems that support racism and exploitation, or maintaining the status quo? Are they actually helpful to the conversation? Or are they more distracting or microaggressive things? So I think it does depend on the nature of the comments to me.
And I'll say that for me, I'm in the middle because it's sort of case to case. I think that there is no way that you can truly know what it's like. And I'll say sort of the cumulative effect of living as something, like the cumulative effect of living as a woman in what it's like being a woman from day to day. I lived in my car for 3 years. So, and as I wasn't homeless on the street, I think someone who has never been sort of homeless can't really speak to what it's like being homeless, because there's sort of this day-to-day effect of how people treat you. Like Beth was saying, in a wheelchair, there's so much stuff going on in the background that is constant, that has an effect on you. So if you are someone who is speaking to one of these subjects and aren't part of the group, like if I'm a man speaking towards something that affects women, I think I have a responsibility to have actually sat and listened to this and really tried to understand. And there's a place of more so, can I speak to it and sort of fight for women's rights or fight for a cause like that. But I think that if someone is coming in and saying something against it, or a man coming in and saying, well, I don't think it's that bad for women, I don't think that a man can like truly speak to that. We can speak as human beings, but there's a lot of work that goes into voicing. There's a lot of listening that needs to happen before you can sort of speak to something.
So can we challenge that just a little bit? Let's probe that idea a little bit further. So when we move that concept into the political arena, and we start to have political discussion that could lead to different laws, if we're saying that empathy alone, that just pure intellectual identification, as opposed to sympathy, that ability to relate to experience to it, that if empathy alone is not as valid, does that then exclude certain people from those political discussions? So let me put it in a more concrete format. Back during the civil rights movement, of course, there were a lot of prominent white people who were part of that movement, who marched with Dr. King, who spoke out in favor of civil rights. If the consensus is that empathy, or by not being a member of that group, your opinion is less valid, are we saying that those members of, say, for instance, the Black Panthers, who felt that white people had no place in the civil rights movement, for whether it's positive or negative, were they right then? Did white people have no place in it, or is it only that you can have a positive opinion and then it's valid, but if your opinion is opposed, then it becomes invalid? That's for anybody.
Okay, well, what I think is that it's really a matter of responsible allyship in that case, in which, yes, sure, we should all be discussing issues that affect people of color, issues that affect LGBTQ people, women. Um, there's just a level of involvement in that discussion in which, you know, it makes me angry when men, for example, say to women, you know, as long as you dress that way or you act that way, you're not going to get safety or validation or credibility, all of those things. Or when somebody actually said something on the last version of the last episode of this that bothered me, and I know that they meant it in a good way, but it was someone that was talking about using the N-word and saying, you know, even when two African American people use it towards each other, I'm just against that. And I don't believe that we have the right to police the internal negotiations of the oppressed. That's your decision, not mine. I can tell other white people why they should not use the N-word. I can tell other people why the history of that word is so bad, but I can't tell you whether or not you can use it with your friends. That's none of my business. And so they're exactly the Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, there were different people arguing amongst themselves about what is most effective. And that is a place where I don't believe that someone outside that group has the right to be instructive in that way. That's when we should step back and listen to what you think rather than telling you what we believe. Responsible allyship does mean being involved in the conversation, but it also means knowing when you don't have anything to offer.
Thank you. Doug, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, picking up on where Beth left off with the N-word, I'm offended when I hear it, whether it be on the radio, rap music, or, you know, two men of color talking to each other in my presence. I find it offensive. It's part of what is wrong with our society, that it can be acceptable for segments of society, be unacceptable for other segments of society. It's either all for one or none for all, in my view. I just really don't, you know, I really don't understand how it can be accepted within the Black community and then played out there in the music genre and rap specifically. And yet, you know, it plays such a huge, significant role in the dialogue going across America today. It's just is the N-word. And here we are throwing it around every day. I mean, half the people listening on chat and in video are going to go listen to songs today with the N-word in it, and it'll be okay. But here we are gnashing our teeth over whether or not the N-word's acceptable. Ludicrous.
Others and panel, feel free to chime in and, without me calling on you.
Okay, I would like to respond if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, and I won't take too long about it, but that to me, that's still dominant culture saying, if I can't say it, you can't say it. And again, there is just so much, some of the most amazing African-American playwrights, poets, writers. August Wilson uses it, his characters address each other in this fashion. We simply don't have the right to know there is so many layers of meaning. Our best responsibility is to monitor our own use of that word, to make sure we don't use that word, to make sure that other white people don't use that word, but it just isn't our business. We don't have, again, it's not our right to tell people, especially people who are in non-dominant culture, what they have the right to do or not do, what they have the right to say or not say. That is their business, not ours. And if you're offended by it, don't say it. That's our biggest responsibility, is to not do the things that are offensive and to listen. But I don't agree any more than I agree that you know, when women, well, if you're going to act that way, you know, then I find it offensive, or I feel that you're exposing yourself to rape or whatever of those things. It's just not your business. It's between us. It's between women to have that discussion, and it's between African-American people to have the N-word discussion. So I just don't think, I think dominant culture one more time saying, if I can't have this thing, then neither can you, is just, we've heard that for hundreds of years.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that too, because again, like a lot of aspects of what you're saying. To me, it's kind of like, who cares? You know, like if members of the Black community want to talk to each other that way, I honestly couldn't care less. I think to me there are actual issues going on in terms of the violence embedded in the prison industrial complex, and that needs to be the focus right now. You know, the lived experiences of marginalized groups that encounter oppression on the daily, like that should be the conversation. Like in terms of what these groups say to each other, or their terms more internally for each other, I, again, kind of like what you're saying, Beth, I just don't think that's my place or the conversation right now.
And I think like a lot of you have to kind of look at sort of like the progression of some of these things. You know, like how did the N-word turn from something that was so hateful and was dangerous and represented something to what some people in the Black artistic community think as it's changed to a positive in certain aspects. I don't for one subscribe to that, but it's kind of difficult to just say, oh, because white people can't use it, like Black people shouldn't. It's offensive across the board, and you know, that's fine. I'd want to dig more into like why that's offensive to you, Doug, when two Black people say it, when anybody says it. And it might be just like clear as day that you're saying this word was a terrible word and I just think it shouldn't be used by anybody, which, okay, I mean, that's a valid thought, you know. But when it speaks to, again, sort of an oppressed people using it amongst each other, we haven't, if it was the society we sort of are discussing and everybody had this like level playing field and it didn't have the negativity and the history that it has, maybe at that point that's the conversation to go, oh, okay, this word isn't okay for anybody. But when people use it in sort of rap songs, they're talking about their life experience, what they've gone through at this at certain times. And there are certain rappers like Public Enemy will use it much differently than some of the other rappers and things like that. So it's more commentary than just reckless usage.
Well, Gabe, I'm going to respond to that briefly. And again, the age difference between you and I, you know, your father and I are more of that age group where that particular word had a derogatory meaning. You mentioned that in some aspects of society, it has a more positive meaning today. I'm just scratching my head over that. You realize the social complexity, the dichotomy that statement entails. I mean, and it goes back to my statement, if it's good for one, it's good for all. You know, if it's a positive thing today, then if it's a positive word, then it's a positive word. To me, it is a negative word, and I don't use it. I would never use it. I don't think I've ever used it. And in the career field I chose for my life, it was absolutely a negative word. Absolutely. So I'm a little bit tainted in that respect. I mean, I just don't see the positivity of that word, whether in song, art, music. I mean, yes, I read a lot, and I find the word is infused in some of the books I read, and it's used to describe a particular scene in a chapter, and you know, I understand why that's there. It's to cause the reader to think and to connect. But when I hear it in discussion, you know, just in casual conversation, and it's thrown out there, I don't find anything positive at all about it. I'm sorry.
And I I don't disagree with you, Doug. I wasn't saying that I personally find it a positive word, but some people have chosen to try and take a word that was supposed to strip us of our humanity and try and turn it into something empowering. And so just in that, of course, it's going to get muddled and sort of not be clear when you're facing some of those sort of things, and trying to find some empowerment out of something that is that terrible, that is continuously prevalent, that still, you know, I talk to some people who are like, I don't how can that word still be used today? It's not used by people regularly, meaning white people regularly. And to those people I say, oh yes it is. Don't the amount that I have been called the N-word in the past 10 years is probably stifling to a lot of people. So don't think because it's not people, it's like social suicide to go out in public and say it, but that word is still used very much to harm and hurt people. So I don't particularly find it positive, but I'm just saying that it's more nuanced than just a black and white going black and white saying it shouldn't be used or it should be used. We need to have that conversation more so.
Well, and respectfully, Doug, this is what I'm saying, which is that when you say you're scratching your head over it or you don't understand, that's what I mean by lived experience. You're looking at it from the outside. You don't know why that history means something different to people within the community. And we can look at words like the B word for women, queer, which now is part of the LGBTQ definition, which is they simply took the word back and took its teeth out, and it no longer, you can't use it against them anymore. And that's kind of the thing. There was a period in the early 2000s I was noticing watching The Sopranos the other day where there was an effort on behalf of white people who were quoting lyrics, rap lyrics and things like that, and using that word and that's where the discussion, like, does it have an ER or does it have an A? They were trying to help take the teeth out of the word. It ended up being kind of a bad experience or experiment, and people moved on from it because it just doesn't work, because we just don't, there is no way for some white people to use it kindly and other people to use it cruelly. So it was better for us to just stop trying that. It was just a bad social experiment. But if you don't understand it, it's because you're not standing in the shoes of people who do. And again, that is an internal negotiation. And having dominant culture one more time say, if I don't have ownership of something, nobody should have ownership of it, is just not helpful, I think.
A lot of good discussion here. I want to do a redirect here, and I want to ask one more prompting question, and then I think we'll segue to something else. So we're having a lot of discussion about, you know, empathy versus sympathy, inclusion in the group. So I want to turn it around another way. Given a lot of things that's happening, a lot of discussion that's happening in society, there's a lot of focus on policing. And I want to take this idea because I've heard it expressed, and I want to now apply it in that particular arena. So the question I want to ask the panel is this. We're talking about inclusion in a group and how that validates your ability to comment on that. And I want you to think about now that in terms of policing. And the question is this: how do you feel about the statement then that if you aren't a policeman and you have never been a policeman, then your opinion about how a policeman should behave in stressful situations is not as valid as a policeman? Who wants to weigh in on that one first?
I'll do it. I mean, you can always just turn me off if I talk too much, but nobody's born a policeman. Nobody has to, you know, nobody occupies the position of policeman because they have no choice and can't pass for anything else. And so to me, that there is some validity to that, but that's not an ethnic group. It's a profession that works for us. that works for the people, and that's different. Again, listening with empathy and understanding why you might find yourself in a position to behave in a way that ends up being violent. I understand that that's a case by case issue, but you have a choice to be a policeman, and we pay your salary, and that's very different.
And
Go ahead, Doug.
Doug?
Well, I can empathize with policemen having carried a gun for a living, and those guys, they are a profession. They have to go through training. They have to go through education and training before they are, badged and employed. And those guys go into situations every day. I mean, I went into situations on a irregular basis where, violence was certainly expected. These guys get up every morning, strap on a gun, and have to go and deal with societal members of society that are, not necessarily not law-abiding, but potentially not law-abiding. And they have to be prepared to go from peaceful, conversant, collaborative to lethal, using lethality to solve a situation. I personally couldn't do it. I would not. I would be the worst policeman in the world, because at every situation I would be expecting the worst to occur. And I'm not so sure that in the current status of our society, the state of affairs on the West Coast and elsewhere, that we can't be criticizing, can't be overly critical of the policemen for their performance on the job. Now, the good news is that aside from the federal agents that are being employed in Portland, the police forces in Minneapolis, New York, Los Angeles, and Portland and Seattle are local boys and girls. And so, they are members of the society which they police. But it is, I can't think of many more professions to be part of these days than being a policeman somewhere.
And I'll say, can I speak to the experience of police officers not being a policeman? No, but I should be able to hold police to a standard. Police should have a clear idea of what their job is, and there's clear evidence of police treating white people differently than black people. And I know that's kind of sort of off topic of your question, but if I'm looking at this, then I as a citizen should be able to go, hey, there's a problem here, and that problem should be addressed. I also talk to police officers and sort of try and gain their perspective, and that's sort of where I draw my comments from policing. And some people go into this job for the wrong reasons, and like I've told a lot of people, I've been pulled over 28 times in my life. 3 times it was because of something I've done, and only 1 time have I had a police officer talk to me in a respectful manner. And I've never lost my temper or talked back to a police officer. I've been forcefully detained and treated inhumanely, and I know that I didn't ever pose a threat to a police officer, so I can at that point comment and go, hey, you're out of line. I don't care what your job is. There's no way that I'm being threatening to you. And I'm on the ground, face down on the concrete in handcuffs, and you're still abusing me when I haven't done anything wrong. I can absolutely comment on policing and go, hey, regardless of what happens in your job, you don't have the right to treat me this way. And so at that moment, I absolutely can comment on it, even though I haven't done police work. It's just, hey, you're bad at your job, or you're abusing your job. Just like if I'm a manager at some other place, I can go, hey, these are your job responsibilities. You're not fulfilling those, or you're abusing your power or whatnot. Policing is a job, so to some extent, I can comment on that. I don't know what they go through each and every day, but to that extent, I can comment on it. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Gabe, what you're saying. And I think, for me, it comes back to, what I was saying a little bit about, what are the comments and who are the people? I mean, in this case, it depends on whether we're on the side of the oppressed or the side of the oppressors. And I mean, policing as an institution has been rooted in oppression from its very beginnings, not to mention highly militarized in more of the modern era. So looking at policing now, like a lot of that funding was taken from communities and from community programs to be put into a really oppressive institution. So to me, yeah, you're darn right, I can speak on that. And I think we all should be, and we should be dismantling that system and divesting from that system, and instead investing in programs that actually support our communities that are actively being oppressed.
All right. Good conversation. I think now is a good time to segue, and we're going to come at this from a different angle now. So I want to set up a scenario for you. First of all, background, I have a multiracial family. And so one of the situations that's unique to multiracial families are that there are times when you may find yourself in a situation where perhaps the greater audience do not understand the composition of your family. Let me set this up a little better with a story from one of my daughters. One of my daughters, when she was in high school, was over at a friend's house. And my daughter has blonde hair and blue eyes. And so when she was at this house, which happened to be a white friend, the father made a comment, first asked her, "Where do you live?" She explained where she lived. And he said, "Oh," he said, "that's a nice area. It's not too black, is it?" Now, she said, "Well, only at my house," because obviously we had taught our children to anticipate these things and that you have to be able to roll with some uncomfortable situations. The question that I have about that is, when a lot of times there is the question I have is this: have you ever been in a situation, and this is going to be for the panel members who are white. Have you ever been in a situation where white people are talking about things that are racial, sexist, these things in your presence? And if so, how do you respond? Who wants to jump in there first?
I think we've all been in that situation. My first husband's family was from North Dakota, and they were very rural people. They were not stupid people at all, but they routinely used the N-word as a descriptor for other people without any kind of visible malice at all. They would, the N-word family down the street. I think sometimes the worst kind of discrimination is the kind that feels benign from the inside, because then you don't know, you're not being deliberately mean, you don't understand why you should be doing that. And so when I was like 20, maybe a little bit older when I married him, and so I didn't feel empowered to say anything to his family at that time. As you get older, you have enough experiences with moments in your life that you go back to and just wish that you had done something better, so that the next time that situation arises, the opportunity when you see it, and you do better. But, so now, yeah, sure. But there's a lot of people that maybe it's not an excuse, but who are living in enough of a homogenized family or social group that is very difficult for them to say things like that. And it's important that we do. And so when I was younger, I feel terrible about that because I didn't say anything, because I was maybe a coward. I was just a young girl that I didn't know how I would do it. But yeah, sure, I think all of us. I feel like every woman has had a Me Too moment, and pretty much every white person has had a moment where someone is saying something racist. It's part of life.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Go ahead, Mike. I was waiting for you to chime in.
No, after you, Doug.
No, I can empathize with Beth, the North Dakota experience, although I'm from South Dakota, significantly different than North Dakota. It was biracial. By society was biracial where I grew up. You were either Indian or you were not, and the whites were the minority. And so, I did hear on occasion older gentlemen, my grandfather's generation, who had been raised by men who had homesteaded and pioneered, as white men as white people tend to refer to the civilization of the prairies. They pioneered the prairies, and the red N was a word I would hear occasionally as a boy growing up. Not often, and when I did hear it, I would hear it from older people, much older than my dad, my grandfather's generation, and further back. So the N word with the word red in front of it was part of my growing up experience, and I, even back then, as a young boy, middle school age probably, starting to figure out how the world works, but not fully understand. Even then, I knew that wasn't the best of terms to use to describe society. I'm probably a little off topic here, but I'm reaching to find the right words, and maybe I should just shut up and let Mike have his say right now.
I mean, I think it's a great question. Yeah, William, I like the question a lot, and it resonates with me because I feel like I'm encountering it all the time right now. I mean, a lot of my friends, or even some people in extended family, they support they support viewpoints that uphold systems of racism and exploitation, and they wield that at times as really aggressive statements that, to me, just like absolutely dismiss someone's identity, which is kind of where we started with this webinar. So I get highly offended by it. I try to address it as best I can, and be a good ally, like you were saying, Beth, as best I can. But I also think it is challenging because it breeds a lot of social isolation from the people that I really care about. So I try and point them to at least resources that are more of like the experts, to say, hey, you and I probably are not, either of us, the experts in this area, but let's look at who is. Like, let's talk about Miriam Kaba or Danielle Surratt or Angela Davis, Alex Vitale, Michelle Alexander, people who have written and spoken and worked in this area for a long time. Like, let's give them the mic right now.
And I know you said that question was for the white members of the panel, but
well, Gabe, I want to say that I did have the same question for you, but turned around, which is that, have you ever been in groups of color or all males where they're making racist remarks against white people or sexist remarks against women? And the same question to you: how do you react to that?
Well, it's situational. So I'll talk about first the misogyny aspect of that. And this is something that, I say often, is that we have to look at sort of I think getting called a racist or a misogynist or anti-gay or anti-Semitic, um, you automatically are like, oh, I'm a bad person, and that's not me. So you automatically shut down that that's a possibility. And we have to realize sort of that this country, and who knows, the world has sort of built some of these things in us. You know, I think that our country, and this will just be my opinion, but has built misogyny into us. Okay. And so I remember as a teenager, yes, hearing a lot of derogatory things towards women and it not sitting right with me. And I've always been sort of a passive person, and I don't enjoy conflict. I used to avoid it a lot. But I started sticking up for women in those closed groups, and I was sort of ostracized. But I am still challenged with viewpoints that I hold are misogynistic now, but at least I can accept that, okay, yeah, I have misogynistic viewpoints. That helps me to change and grow. Now, in terms of have I been with friends of color that have said race bad things towards white people? Yes, yes, I have. And in sometimes it's this sort of collective oppressed sort of talk where it's like, man, white people do this constantly. Like I walk into a store and white people will visibly like clutch their purse, you know? And so that's sort of a joke at their expense. But also there's this sort of there's negative in painting all white people in a certain light, because I don't truly believe that. And I've always sort of challenged that. Now, I am half white, but I grew up in a black family, so I didn't really understand like or identify with that white half really ever. But so it that's what I say is it's sort of situational, and that means like if I feel like people are just saying horrible things about white people, I still kind of go, hey, that's not okay. But especially like when I was younger, there's a lot of things I let slide. Same thing about the gay community, you know, LGBTQ. I have always, since I was 16, I've been an activist for them. But on that same note, even past when I was 16, I would say things like, oh, that's gay. Like, you know, and that's sort of like very problematic. And one of my friends had to call me out on that. And it's sort of like this, but I'm an activist. There's no way I can be anti-gay, but that's not true, you know. I'm sitting there using this and I'm like trying to once again explain away somebody's pain by going, well, that's not what I meant by it. But I had to do some reflection and go, oh, okay. So, you know, I think I've been in all of those situations and reacted in a good way and in a not good way. That's it.
All right. I'm going to throw a different, I'm going to throw this at you a little bit different. And I'll start it again with another one of those personal stories that, so when I met my wife, during a conversation, one of the things that she said to me was, well, I had asked her to describe a person, and she described this person very clearly. And then when I went to meet the person, it surprised me that the one thing she had left out was that he was black. Otherwise, it was, you know, it was a perfect description of him. So I questioned that. Now, it helps if you understand that my wife is white. So I asked my wife, why? She wasn't my wife at the time. How is it that you said everything except his race? Her response to me was, oh, I don't really see color. I said, so what about me? She said, I never really saw it. about about it. I just don't see color. It's not how I was raised. My take on that, not to exhibit any bias or to try to influence, but my take on that was, well, I'm black, so you don't see me then. But her take on that was completely different. It was that the race of a person is insignificant, and so therefore I focus on other things. This brings up the question about a colorblind society, right? This idea. What is the goal when we talk about racism as we're having this great big national conversation? Is a colorblind society the goal? Is that the right goal? That's our question.
I'll jump in.
Who wants to jump?
I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
I don't think that should be the goal, personally. There's so much rich culture. There's so much rich background that it's sort of negating all of that. If you say I don't see color, and it's not true. You do. We all prejudge people. That's where prejudice comes from. You know, are you a man? Are you a woman? Are you big? Are you small? How do I interact with this person? That's how we do. So not seeing color isn't. I don't believe that's true, but it shouldn't be a colorblind society. It just needs to be a society where being a color or being a gender or anything doesn't hinder you socially. That's sort of, and when I say socially, I mean like economically, human rights, and just your rights as, I'll just talk about America. Your rights as an American should not be hindered by the color of your skin or your gender or your sexual identity, XYZ.
Who else?
So I remember when I was a kid that there were, as women were really working to enter the workplace and Gabe, I'm a little bit older than you, as you well know. In my lifetime, women were not allowed to open bank accounts without asking their husbands for permission. This is in my conscious lifetime. So I think it would be the same thing as saying, like, I don't see gender. You clearly do. The issue is whether or not the traits that you are describing are the traits that are used to other someone and separate them from privilege, or opportunity, or to subject them to violence or oppression. Political correctness has never been about the oppression or censorship of language and ideas. That's a really disingenuous characterization of it. It is about the misuse of power. And it's the reason why if African American people want to speak badly about white people amongst themselves, we haven't really given you very much reason not to do that. And we lose nothing by it. You don't take away opportunities from us. You don't separate us from jobs that we want. We still make more money than you do. We still are more likely to, have a policeman pull up alongside my husband and me and say, you got a tail light out, right? Do you need some help getting home safely? As opposed to, Sandra Bland, who died for that. To erase the characteristics that cause you to be othered is to not look at the dynamic that has caused that. It still says there are other people who are responsible for the decision about whether or not you get all of the things. We need to address the people or the institutionalized dynamics that cause those things to be a liability to you. When I was a kid, I didn't say black either because I thought it felt to me like I was describing a liability. It embarrassed me. I was afraid that I might insult a black person. I mean, I'm like 10 now. I'm talking about being 10, but like, that I might offend a black person by mentioning that they were black, because I thought, God, from what I'm looking at, it does not look like very much fun to be black. And so I don't think the issue is about erasing differences. The issue is about removing the unequal power dynamic that causes those descriptors to be dangerous.
All right. Who else?
I can go, but I wasn't sure if Jacqueline was brought in to talk at this point.
We do. You know what? I think it's. Thank you, Mike. I think it's a great time for us to bring the audience into this discussion. And looks like Jacqueline has a point she'd like to make. Jacqueline, go ahead.
Hi guys. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of go off of what Gabe and Beth were saying. I think it's important to eliminate more so the hatred between seeing color, but I think it's almost impossible to not see color. We are the human race and we are so diverse. And I think it's important that we embrace that. The main thing I hear constantly is like people making comments, oh, if you don't like this country, you should go back to where you came from. You know, they'll say something to someone who speaks a different language, like you need to learn how to speak English or go back to your country. And I think that's where we should kind of analyze where the problem lies. You know, to see color is just something our human eyes naturally do. We see all kinds of different hues, but the hatred that comes behind that, the bigotry, the prejudice is something that I hope we can all eventually eliminate. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jacqueline. All right, Mike, you're up.
I mean, everything to what you just said, Jacqueline. I like that a lot. And I do think, kind of touching on what you were saying, Gabe, there's tremendous beauty and I would say inspiration in in just marginalized groups or other groups and identities and cultures. So I think we do miss that from colorblindness, and 100% what you guys are saying when it comes to just ignoring the systems that kind of create these inequalities between groups, or kind of creates that marginalization of groups. So it doesn't allow us to really speak to, it just kind of hides the racism embedded in our, getting jobs, housing, healthcare, policing, prisons, all the systems around us, and completely ignores the history that's attached to that and the historical basis for race, the origins of that kind of thinking. Along with all the ways that like these ideas are interconnected, right? The ways that race and gender and oppression for different groups are interrelated.
Thank you. Doug?
I'm trying to string my thoughts together. There, a number of things come to mind. One, something that Beth touched on. I don't subscribe to this current trend in society where everybody's a victim and everybody has been mistreated and oppressed and to use the pejorative term for the younger generation, no offense, Gabe, I think you're old enough that it doesn't apply to you, but the snowflakes. I just I have a difficulty seeing color first and foremost as the most important thing that comes to mind when I meet an individual. If that were true, one of my closest and dearest friends would not be Gabe's dad. And I've been blessed my whole life by living in multicultural, multiracial environments overseas and here at home, neighborhoods that are integrated. Like the one that I left in Colorado and moved out here to North Carolina when I retired. And so it's not the most important thing. How you present yourself, how you speak to me is how I'm going to respond to you in kind. And I really don't give two hoots in hell what color your skin is. I really don't. And maybe that's the beauty of living in the diverse environment that the military allowed me to enjoy for 33 years. I will tell you a quick story, and it is rather colorful, but my first sergeant, when I was a young company commander, a captain, my executive officer was Bobby Smith. He was black, best friend in the world today, still a great friend. We served in the Pentagon together. But our first sergeant, the senior non-commissioned officer in that company, was Bob Gibson. And Bob is also black, about 5 feet 4 inches tall, strapping 40-year-old man who had a 20-something-year-old captain in charge of him and 130 odd men. And it was snowing, it was wintertime, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, it was time for the captain to get up and do the rounds of the perimeter to make sure that everybody was okay. And I shake the snow off my sleeping bag. I'm getting out into the cold, trying to motivate myself to do my job. And Bob Gibson comes out of the dark and hands me a steaming hot cup of black coffee in a canteen cup. If you all can picture this silver steaming canteen cup on a cold German morning. And Bob hands me this cup and says, "Here you go, sir. Hot, black, and lots of it, just like sex." And I was, to this day, I'm still stunned that he said that to me. And we both laughed at that joke. And there was nothing at all to me that was wrong with what he said. And I'm trying to analyze it now in this current culture of what America is. But Bob Gibson, retired Sergeant Major, living outside of Fort Hood, Texas. God bless you. It's one of my favorite stories. And if that was offensive to anyone listening, I apologize. But it's how I see the world. I don't see Gabe being biracial. I don't see Melvin being black. I'm either respectful we're either respectful to each other or we're not. And the color of your skin is secondary.
Oh, go ahead.
It's not going to be because of your skin.
Yeah, it's interesting, Doug, because you talk about sort of your experience, and I do think it is sort of a blessing for you to have been in the military, and sort of a lot of military folk that I talk to, not saying that the military is devoid of racism by any means, but a lot of people that I talk to, there has to be sort of this camaraderie, and I think more so perhaps post Korea and Vietnam wars, and I won't talk, go too much into depth about that, but it seems like you have had people that you have looked up to that have been black, and as you said, like you growing up where you grew up, the emphasis wasn't sort of put on you were seeing these things grow up. America is still very segregated in terms of like pockets that people live in, and so there are white people in Iowa right now that have never seen a black person in real life, and there are probably black folks in St. Louis who haven't seen a white person outside of a police officer, and so I think that definitely, and by no means am I saying, oh, Doug, you characterize and then judge like, well, as Gabe's dad is black, am I going to be friends with him? That I don't think that was like the purpose of saying that. It's just this sort of like initial split second categorizing people, and it's not bad. It's just how we function as humans. But the next step that some people take that to is something that I think you talking about your upbringing sort of misses, is like, now that I've categorized this person and I see their color, what does that mean? To me, the experiences you talked about say to me that your brain processes what those colors mean to you differently than other people. I know that there are some people who would see my dad and they're just terrified of him. But it's interesting, like hearing your stories, and I hear what you mean by what you say. You don't judge people based on color. I would still challenge that to an extent, but it doesn't mean that you judge people negatively on their color. It could mean that you judge people positively on their color, just not as a conscious sort of thought process. And side note, I'd love to read a short novel by you, Doug. That snow coffee story was very descriptive and lovely. Anyway, that's me.
The thing about, you know, your white people in Iowa and black people in St. Louis, Missouri, you know, to that I would respond this. I would say it's time to get out there in the world and meet people, to move in next door to them, to buy a house next door to Melvin and Sharon Greer, and not give two hoots in hell that Melvin is not. When I look in the mirror, I don't see Melvin. You know, I don't see the guy next door on the other side. If you remember DC, David, you know, just, you know, a retired police officer, and also black, just got lucky, and those were my neighbors, and to this day I miss my neighborhood. And if more people would get out of their comfort zones, if that's what's required, or if even that's the issue, but find a place, you know, when you're living in an apartment, whether you're living in a high-rise apartment in a big city, or in a suburb of Colorado Springs, or a small town in South Dakota, just get out there and meet people, and you know, once you've got a neighbor like Melvin, you know, if I hadn't had the experience of having prominent, very influential black men in my life as a junior officer, I might have been a different person when I met your dad. But when I met your dad, aside from his, I hope he's not on here, the fact that if it comes to something mechanical, there's the guy with two left thumbs, and I love him for it. I mean, but you know, get out there and meet people.
Yep.
Move in next door to them. If they're not comfortable, make them comfortable. A little.
So, panel, I don't know if you're paying attention. I'm sorry, am I cutting someone off?
No, I can wait.
I was just going to mention that I don't know if you're paying attention to the chat. There's a lot of great comments and questions going on in there. And I wanted to just kind of follow up on one that I saw in the chat that was sent out to the panelists. And it's on this topic. And the question said, how do you communicate with another individual from a different background if you won't acknowledge that very background?
Well, that speaks to what I was about to say, which is that I tend to think that people who say they don't see color, I think of that as kind of an abdication of responsibility in terms of the dialogue that they have. Because if you say, like, I don't see any color, I don't know when black people are black, to me that means that you have just said, well, I don't know anything about this, and so you can't make me talk about any of the issues that might affect black people differently than they affect me, and whether or not I have any responsibility in that, whether or not I benefit from institutionalized racism, whether or not I think that that I buy into the idea of the inherent criminality of black men. So when you say that, you're sort of saying, I mean, it's the same thing as saying, well, I didn't know I was lying. I thought that was the truth right then. Well, then you can't really make a person responsible. You can't call them a liar. And you can't, I'm not saying you're a liar. They're two separate things. But when someone says, I don't see color, then you can't hold them to any responsibility for addressing any of the issues that might directly affect black people. And so this to me speaks, Doug, I don't mean to call you out, you seem like a very nice man, but in terms of saying, I don't see color, I really like the black people that I have met and am friends with, but then you go to, like, I don't understand the society right now where everybody's a victim. And I am singling white cis het men as the issue, but yes, that's true. Pretty much everybody has been your victim at some point, or our victim, if you want to, the victim of whiteness, White women are in this kind of interesting, I mean, I think we're the most despised demographic in America right now, and people are not really wrong about that. But the issue is that white women are in this very unique position in which we can do terrible damage on behalf of the white patriarchy while not being safe from it ourselves, and also being oblivious to both of those points. Now, how much would you pay? Now, how much would you pay? Slices, dices, julienne fries. But so, yeah, we have to address the victimhood. We have continually victimized for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so to just sort of go like, hey, yeah, we're cool right now. I said we're cool. So can we just like, I'm just saying, you know, let's just start from scratch. It's really not the privilege of the perpetrators to offer the olive branch and decide how to proceed. So to not see color is to erase all of the things that we still need to address about how color affects people in this society. And to belittle and dismiss in this way of sort of just going, well, yeah, now all of a sudden everybody's a victim. Well, we're addressing traditional victimhood, which has gone on for a really long time, and again, occurs in a place where you and I are blind to it. So, you know, I think we do need to see color, and I do think we do need to acknowledge the fact that there has been a lot of victimizing. It's not fair to not let people talk about that now.
So I think you're right, Beth. I mean, I'll accept that that you know you are of the opinion that I should be paying attention to color. I don't like labels. I find labels to be as offensive as the N-word in most cases. I don't see myself as a perpetrator. I used the word snowflake earlier. I could come up with some harsher words for what I see as the society, elements of society that are, and I don't mean racially. I mean, not sure what I mean, but you know, I'm not sure what else to categorize, you know, folks that just feel that they are constantly being a victim. I rose from some very, very challenging situations as a boy in a very lower middle class family without a lot of opportunities. And I didn't get here where I am today by feeling that I was a victim, nor do I accept that I was a perpetrator. And I think everybody listening and online knows what that means. My family never held slaves. We've never been slave owners. And frankly, when I spent my first couple of years in the South, I was really shocked that some of that you know, late 1970s, early 1980s, that late in this country's history, that there was still some of that going on. And Melvin shared with me stories about growing up in the South that I just kind of, you know, I found unbelievable, truly unbelievable, but truthful. So it's, you know, I don't think I'm being naive in my views that, in the fact that I don't see color. I don't see color first and foremost as the most important thing about meeting an individual. It probably registers at some point, but it's not the first thing that comes to mind when I'm meeting someone. If it were, then, and if I were that kind of person, then I wouldn't be talking to Melvin. I wouldn't know Gabe. I wouldn't know Jade. I wouldn't know, you know, a lot of folks in the Greer family. We've shared holidays together. So.
Well, I mean, go ahead and ask a Black mother of a Black son whether or not color is the first thing that she has to consider when sending her son out into the world and telling him to leave his hands on the steering wheel and to speak respectfully to police officers and all of these things, and to worry every time he leaves the house that he might not come home alive. The fact is that you are in a position, I am in a position in which we don't have to see color first thing. And one of the things that happens with not recognizing white privilege is understanding, I believe that you worked very hard to remove yourself from a difficult situation as a child and to move up the ladder. The question is whether a Black person in your situation would have had the same opportunities and been able to be sort of lifted along that trajectory in the same way. Our society is designed to serve you. our society is designed to serve me. And it's interesting, again, with white women are not equal to white men, but we are also recipients of white privilege. And we don't see it. Fish don't see water. We've talked about this a lot, you know, but our entire society is designed to benefit us. And every time we notice one of those things that others someone else, we are noticing the thing that separates them from this immediate trajectory which is available to people. It doesn't mean that every white person gets privilege, or that every Black person that is able to transcend it is having Black privilege. That's not the same thing. But it's very easy to be on the inside of dominant culture and not understand why color is important to people, or race is important to people, or gender identity is important to people outside that, because we have not been in a position in which that has been made important to us. That's what responsible allyship is understanding that fighting for something that doesn't directly remove something from you or me is how humanity works. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have received things that other people simply have not.
And I want to look at, because I see some of the comments and sort of talking about victimology. You also have to, I think something that people don't take, let's put this out there, okay? There's always this argument of, look how far we've come. Are Black people really, like young generation Black people, comparing your lives now to the struggles of the 50s and 60s? Here's something to think about, right? And this is just my own thought that I've talked to a lot of people about, okay? We talk about white privilege, right? And what we don't realize is sort of that what it carries on. Not only like what white parents are able to pass on, but let's just talk about sort of the mental effect, okay? Black people haven't had many in sort of, we'll talk about the generation before me, like my dad's generation. You have to look at how many heroes were Black people presented with that looked like them, like on television or media, and sort of like the psychology that Black people had to go through. There's an element of white parents being able to sort of pass on self-worth to their children, where I think that a lot of Black people, whether they know it or not, would have to seriously overcome the self-hatred that this society has placed upon Black men and women. And just to be able to overcome that, in order for, oh man, I'm upset. In order for, I think my dad sort of pass on self-worth to me, took a lot of reflection. And I think a lot of things needed to be set up in order for him to have that confidence in himself to kind of pass that on, that a lot of Black people don't get. We are told that we are criminals, that we're less than intelligent wise, and that's kind of been built into our society from what we watch. That's why inclusion in sort of art is so important, because we haven't had just normal Black heroes. And if they're presented, it's always our heroes have made it out of poverty. They've overcome their odds, which at times seems impossible. And so it's not this like, it's been so ingrained in us for so long that we are less than, that it takes a lot to sort of overcome that, to tell yourself you're good enough in times of doubt. when you're hitting failure after failure, you know, failure is typically good because that's how people grow. But if we can't even get past those failures, it's hard for us to grow. And when there's so many things in society that is pitted against us, it you can take responsibility for your own actions. I don't think that career-wise I am where I would like to be, and a lot of that falls on choices that I made. But there is an aspect to that that isn't on me. So I'm not sitting here saying like I'm a victim all the time, but you know, there's a lot of it's hard to be told that I'm an anomaly because I am a father in the house to my child, or that my dad is, you know. That's not a positive way to start, is go, oh wow, good for you, you're doing you're doing this when a lot of your people aren't. um ugh, I got emotional and then my brain left. So I hope I was making some of those points. It's this like victim mentality that you can't just shake off as, you guys can't just be victims. Because same thing Beth has said, we have been victimized, and it's irresponsible to not like pay attention to that. There is self-responsibility that people can take for their actions, but there has to be an understanding of, you know, what this country is built on and how this country is built.
Well, there was a lot there. Anybody want to respond?
Well, I saw this comment and I heard it as well about things not being the same as they were in the 50s and 60s or before that, and how, you know, I've heard that a lot in my life from people who are my friends, or who had been my friends, whatever, about, well, things aren't the same as they were then, but somehow that means it's all over and not the same. Simply refuses to acknowledge. I mean, just because I can open a bank account now without asking my husband does not mean that gender equality has occurred. Just because there are, you know, Black men who are able to have good jobs and get a good education and succeed in this society does not mean that all of it's gone. Sandra Bland, George Floyd, all of these people are indications that that simply isn't the case. It's just not the case. And to refuse to acknowledge that simply because we've made some progress, I think really stalls, it's going to happen anyway, but it really stalls the movement forward that we need, unless you look at what's happening now and understand that just because some progress has been made, it just doesn't change enough yet. It hasn't changed enough. And again, it's always the people who are members of, I understand, Doug, that you don't want to be called a perpetrator, and I believe you. I sincerely believe that you are not a perpetrator, but we are members of a perpetrating class that continues to perpetrate. And it is exactly the same thing as looking at police officers and saying, well, there's a few bad apples. Okay, that's true. The rest of them need to take responsibility for culling those apples. There are a bunch of white racists who are, and there is intrinsic, institutionalized racism in every part of our society. You know, I mean, Mike, you brought up the prison industrial complex. Black men, and not just Black men, but people of color, are arrested more regularly. They are sentenced more harshly. They are denied parole. They're spoken to in a different way that we are. I mean, there are so many things that continue to go on. And just because you don't do them, just because I don't do them, doesn't mean, and I have committed many, many acts of inadvertent racism in my life. There's no way not to. We're raised in this giant blind spot, and all we can do right now is ask when we've made a terrible mistake and move forward. But you know what? That's uncomfortable because we're in a minefield We are the ones who laid those mines. So we don't know where our ancestors laid them, but guess what? We benefit from this system, and to not acknowledge that and understand that it needs to be dismantled and that it is our responsibility. It's not their responsibility. It's not the responsibility of people of color. It's not women's responsibility to make the patriarchy stop raping us. It is the oppressor that needs to continue to do the work. Sorry, I got all bent about it.
No,
I
that's
warned
okay.
you.
I'll chime in here too. And I mean, I don't know how much I should. I feel like, Gabe, we should just replay your clip like over and over for the rest of the rest of the webinar. I thought that deserves the mic a little bit more than me. But I will say, in thinking about that, I mean, thinking about what colorblindness does, it kind of does the exact opposite of that. It takes the experiences that you're talking about, kid, and that you touched on, Beth, and says like, this isn't a problem anymore. Like, this doesn't have to be reality, but it is reality, and it is reality for a lot of people. And so I think those are the voices of that lived experience that should really, be getting the mic right now. So I would almost say that everything that colorblindness does, or that like perspective does, I kind of want to do the exact opposite. I feel like it focuses on like an individuality and like just like bad apples, right? If just the bad apples that see color, are the problem. To me, it's like it's the systems that we live in anyway. So I mean, this is a very pervasive thing, and I think it also really like tries to kind of like hide or say that, hey, we've already made progress. To me, it's like, and we're barely started. Like, we've got so much work to do. So I think a lot of the things that colorblindness does, I think we should do the opposite.
Interesting. I'm going to take another question that was put into the chat and throw it out to the panelists. And this one was actually directed to the panel. And I'm going to read it verbatim as it was in the chat. So it starts out, BLM and ALM. I've been told that I'm racist if I say all lives matter, because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. But I see the BLM movement as being quite divisive lately, filled with violence. Question, has it been infiltrated by people with less than pure motives, in your opinion? Panel?
I mean, is it Black Lives Matter is sort of a message and a movement. Let's look at that, right? Why did that come about? Because Black people were being murdered. We'll say Black people were being killed by police in a way that's unjust, or not even police, and what people are saying is, hey, let's call attention to this. Okay, Black people's lives are expendable. To most of America, Black lives don't matter. And so we're calling attention to that. And to say all lives matter, it negates that. So your question was, do I feel like people have infiltrated that? I mean, in every sort of movement, there is going to be people who have ulterior motives, who view things differently. I mean, you can look at the differences between how Martin Luther King Jr. went about things, how Malcolm X for a time went about things, how Medgar Evers went about things, and it's always it's different, and so yeah, there's so much behind that question, right? It's like, are people getting violent? Are they rioting? Yeah. Is that necessarily like a Black Lives Matter movement? I don't know. The organization has been accused of various things. I can't speak to that. The actual organization, Black Lives Matter, I can't speak to that. I don't know why it makes a different, it's become politicized, you know, when it should just be a movement for, hey, please stop killing us. Uh, and that's the end message. Why isn't that enough? Because it challenges what people believe, and there's a lot of core beliefs that Americans have that, one, they don't want to admit to, and two, they don't know. And this goes back to what I was talking about, how we've been presented historically. If you look at how, you know, like Black women have been the archetypes of Black women, Mammy, Sapphire, Jezebel. Black men have been presented as Sambo, Nat, and Jack. So that is the mentality of America, even if it's not like on the forefront. It's like Black people don't matter as much. That's what we are trying to change. Just say, hey, my life matters as much as everybody else's. That's what we're trying to say, is like, we want all lives to matter, but Black lives don't as much as all these other lives. And so I wonder why that question, you know, does an organization that has been, sure, we'll say have been hijacked by people who have worse motives, should that change this movement? Should that change this message? That's sort of my question back. I can't speak to that, you know, because once again, you have to look at what sources have been presented. I talked to a lot of people. I talked to a lot of people about this, and sort of the information that's being presented to one side of people say that Black Lives Matter organization is a bunch of terrorists. And the other side is like, no, they're all good people. So where in there is the truth, and why is that muddling like the actual message?
Well, okay, so any movement, literally any movement, has people that co-opt it and use it for nefarious purposes. I mean, that's why Jimmy Hoffa is in some football end zone somewhere, you know, it's because there's always people who will exploit good things. And one of the things that has traditionally made this country great is that rights are not removed from us simply because some people abuse them. There is no right that we have that is not abused by someone. And but they're inalienable, these rights, and that means that you can't make them, we don't get them taken away just because some people exploit them. The other thing is that I noticed that with othered, marginalized people, that if they don't present themselves as completely pure and blameless in every possible way, suddenly the entire movement is invalidated, where, you know, again, white people can be all kinds of horrible and nobody goes like, oh my God, all white people are going to lose their jobs if this horrible white man doesn't stop doing what he's doing, or this horrible white woman. We don't face that every day. So I need to know why, or we all need to consider why performative worthiness is part of what we expect people to do when they are fighting for rights. Because here's a news flash for you. The people who are handing out rights, first of all, if they can be bestowed or rescinded, they're not rights, are they? They're conditional privileges. And so when the people are handing them out, you know, spoiler alert, they are not waiting for the moment where the marginalized act like they deserve them. Their agenda is to not give them for whatever reason. And it doesn't matter. They're not saying, you know, we'll start paying women exactly what men do when we feel like they can manage their money better. I mean, that's not the deal. There's been no oppressing force ever in the history of the world that was like, oh, we didn't understand that you didn't want to be exploited or oppressed. So we're sorry. We didn't realize you were also human beings or living beings. And so, you know, we'll stop now. 400, 500 years of violence, and now we're upset because some people burned a Target. I mean, Get over it. If you can't, there is no way that we have, every single time people of color have asked to be considered in this way, we have told them they are asking the wrong questions or behaving in the wrong way, and that we need to hear it in a nicer way. Who are we to say how we're supposed to hear it? These are rights that should have been given a long time ago. It's not our position to make them work harder for it. So, I mean, it seems disingenuous to just say, well, we've been beating and lynching and burning you out and created the prison industrial complex to continue exploiting you after we were specifically asked not to. And now we want to say, well, you're still not, this one isn't right either. And when you hit on the right one, we'll go ahead and tell you, which indicates that we know damn well we're not giving out the rights.
And Treese, you asked me a specific question. Can I see how the violent, destructive aspects of the movement might turn folks off to the validity of the cause? Not really. I mean, I see what you're saying, but if you look at the cause itself and say, hey, Black people are being mistreated and murdered, I don't understand how anybody could be turned off of that cause. Now, this violent destructiveness, as Beth was stating, this isn't the first time we've cried for this, right? There was somebody who kneeled during the anthem. They said, that's wrong, don't do that. There have been hundreds, thousands of peaceful protests. They're saying, no, you're doing it wrong. And all of this violence that is put on us, you know, it's like, how can you, all we see is police violence constantly in our communities. Now, that's an overstatement. Obviously, that's not all we see, but is that the majority? Yes. Treese, I had a conversation with you about the DOJ report on Ferguson police. After Michael Brown was shot, everybody was like, why are they rioting? How can they burn their city down? Well, it's because of decades of mistreatment by the Ferguson Police Department and corruption that directly impacted the poor, marginalized minority community in Ferguson. This isn't coming out of nowhere. This violence is not coming out of nowhere. It's not just people going, oh, I want to burn things and smash things. If you look at the mentality of riot mentality, what is actually going on is that people are getting swept up because they feel this way. When they see a police officer kneeling on a man's neck for 9 minutes until he dies, they go, that is the same thing that could have happened to me or has happened to somebody that I know. And we peacefully do this over and over again, and we're told it's not enough or it's not in the right way, and it doesn't change. It changes laterally or in appearance wise, you know, but it becomes something else, like the prison industrial complex. It becomes something different. So it looks like progress, but it's a lateral move. And people are tired of it. All they want is their rights. I think that the reason for these conversations is because we all agree that people want fundamentally the same thing. If we're going over it, all of us here just want to live our lives, for the most part, and pursue happiness, pursue liberty, and pursue life. And those things are not an equal pursuit for all people, and people are mad. So that same thing that you're saying, things have progressed so much from the 50s and 60s, it's not. And the people who are oppressed are telling you it's not, and you're going, oh, but I see it differently. And the oppressors are saying, I see it differently. That's the answer to your question. I hope it was not attacking. I wasn't trying to be, but I hope that was clear.
I will say too, I think it also saying that like we won't support this movement if we see, you know, some instances of violence or something like that. It requires like a perfect victim, which I think is, I mean, that's problematic for a lot of reasons. But I also think that like for those who have been oppressed, like they don't have to be a perfect victim. Like we don't have to ask that of people. Even prisoners right now who are in jail for violent crimes, like we should be advocating on their behalf, even if they're there for something that is, you know, that we consider not a perfect, they're not perfect victims in some way. Like we have to still stand up for people who have been oppressed, regardless of whether we see them as some kind of perfect victim.
You know, panel, I want to point out, I'm going to read a comment that from the chat again that I think might deserve a little comment on it. And let me get to it so I can read it without paraphrasing. It says, simply telling people to be less racist or to train cops to be unbiased will not solve anything. Police brutality is a symptom and not the root of the cause. What are your thoughts?
I agree that it's not the root of the cause. I think that we start arguing about police brutality and we get, and that's where the conversation gets so frustrating, is because people are going, it's not happening. that's a few bad apples. It's not an issue. And we're like, hey, if we can't even agree that we're saying, hey, police brutality is an issue and let's fix it, not like let's destroy the police. That's not what people are saying. It's like, hey, this is an issue. Why can't we look at it? Just because you haven't been brutalized by the police doesn't mean that it's not happening. So then we need to get past that part of the conversation to go, where does this come from and how do we fix it?
Other thoughts?
So the media, you know, for all the validity of the Black Lives Matter movement, and frankly, I'm not in tune with it as well as I probably should be. I did go online and look it up on the website that they have and click the donate button, and the organizations that the money goes to was purely political. And the amount of money being paid to individuals who manage this Black Lives Matter website or movement was far exceeding what I make or ever made. All that aside, the media, the goodness of the Black Lives Matter movement to achieve something positive as a result of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis is secondary now to what's going on in Portland and elsewhere. I mean, this is now we're being fed the daily thuggery of criminal activity, and that's what Black Lives Matter is now in the minds of many people, and I question it. You know, we're not, you know, Gabe, good point. I mean, we've been here before. The 50s, the 30s, the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles years ago. I mean, this is not something that is, oh my God, look what's happening. The fabric of America is being torn apart by this one-off Black Lives Matter movement. Now, we've been here before, and you know, Beth talked about the 50s and 60s. You mentioned it as well. I think we get better every time. At least I hope we do, that we get better every time. But if you want me to truly empathize with the Black Lives Matter, me, not just me, but the average American, regardless of color, to empathize with the Black Lives Movement matter, then we've got to stop ripping apart the cities, you know, police forces that are, I think the police forces are by and large good. Yes, there are clearly instances where they're not. And Ferguson was, I didn't read that report you referenced, but I'll go find it and read it. the police are now running away from criminal activity. They're turning their backs on it and being told to ignore it. And the same city officials who are standing with the Black Lives Movement folks on the front lines are now being, screaming for police to come in and to clean things up a bit. And when a federal piece of federal property is threatened, federal agents should and are being employed to protect that property. I don't have any issue with that. But again, bottom line up front, I think that what the media is showing us about we've gone, George Floyd is just, that's a name that's out there now. It's not the face of the movement anymore.
So I wonder though, Doug, like, it's like, but Black Lives Matter has been around for a long time. This isn't a new thing. Black Lives Matter didn't come about during George Floyd, and I would venture to say that most of your experiences with police officers have been rather as pleasant as they could be. But I gave an example of me being pulled over 28, 29 times in my life, and 3 of them were because I was speeding, or I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. All the other times, those officers couldn't tell me why they were pulling me over, or they're very direct. What are you doing in this neighborhood? So,
To that, Gabe.
One second. Or you fit the description of somebody. And again, I've only been talked to politely by one police officer, Doug, so much so that I wrote that man an email. He wrote me a ticket for speeding, and I wrote him a thank you email saying, I appreciate that you spoke to me like a human being and on a professional level.
Take a ride with me sometime into Western South Dakota on one of the Indian reservations. Let me drive, you be the passenger. And I can share with you that those same experiences you had are not limited to your particular race. And it's, it's alive and well, and it's cross-cultural, but it's, I keep my hands on the steering wheel when the BIA policemen are on patrol, and I'm the white kid on the reservation. Even at my age, I am very, very careful about what I do and where my hands move.
Are you worried about being shot, Doug?
Oh yeah, I mean I've been shot at. It's part of the fact and fabric of life out there. I mean,
then I don't understand how you say that.
I want to just
please
because
go ahead. I'm
sorry
done.
to interrupt. We've got Taylor, who wants to add a comment. Taylor.
Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for having this discussion, Gabe. I know we spoke a little bit before this. So I had made the comment about, I believe that police brutality is more of a symptom rather than the root of the cause. And I just wanted to elaborate on my opinion on that a little bit. So yeah, I just think that it's not to say that, telling police to act differently or telling people to be less racist. Not that I don't think that clearly some people's minds could be changed about that, but I really think to get into the root of it, if we're looking back, if you look at slavery or Jim Crow and redlining and just all the things that Black people have dealt with in history, I believe that has pushed a lot of Black communities into a place of, I don't know, whatever you want to call the opposite of privilege. And I think that has caused them to not have the same opportunities. And maybe, if you look at a lot of numbers, although they don't commit majority of crimes or anything like that, they do commit crimes at a disproportionate rate. But I'm not blaming them for that. I think a lot of that comes from them being in poverty and not having the same opportunities as other races, which then can maybe lead to police mistreating them. And again, not saying the police aren't guilty in this, but I really think if we want to get to the root of it, I think we need to do the work inside those communities to try to give them the same opportunities that other communities have. And I think that is what will actually help, whether that's pumping money into these neighborhoods to give them better education systems, better housing, all those types of things. But that's just my opinion on it. I also think that I would just like to hear the panel's, I guess, ideas for actual, like, real societal changes rather than just kind of telling people to treat people differently. Because personally, I think it's just a lot deeper than that. It's like we need, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of reparations in the sense of just giving people money, but I am in favor of reparations in the sense of trying to put money into communities. And I would like to hear people's opinions on that, as far as like if they think that would be a better way to get bigger change. Because I personally think that just telling people to act differently is kind of like a Band-Aid that's not really going to get in there and fix the real problem. So
Can I go?
Go.
So I see what you're saying. I do tend to be more of a fan of reparation. Doug, to your point about the Indian reservation, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you are an exception in that way, as far as what the normal white man is experiencing in this world. And there is also the fundamental difference of the fact that Indian reservations are there because we put them on those reservations. We deny them water, we deny them medical care, equipment for education, recourse against violence. There's all of these things that, so yeah, sure, when you're on there, you might be in danger of being shot, which should cause you to empathize. But the other thing is that nobody's rights should be contingent on whether you empathize with them about whether they should have them. That's the whole point about whether it's a right or a conditional privilege. Just saying, well, I don't feel strongly enough for you for me to think that you deserve this. It shouldn't matter. It should not matter. And so Taylor, what I think is that this is really the biggest thing that can possibly happen, is the dialogue between people. The other thing is that no society changes because everybody decides that they want to do the right thing. A majority of people suddenly do. There's a book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, which is a really interesting book about exactly this. But I want to phrase this right. Well, now I sort of lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about it. I had chemo this last year. It sometimes makes it so I can't quite think carefully enough. But here, let me look at my note. Oh, also that a large percentage of people have to subscribe to the idea, but then societal censure, economic censure, discomfort towards the institutions and entities that do not wish to change is also an integral part of what happens. You can't make everyone want to do the right thing. Eventually, you just have to make some of them do it anyway.
I wanted to jump in too and just
I'm going to jump in here, and I'm really sorry, Mike, but we are at the time, almost at the top, where we're going to have to wrap up discussion. I'll give you 30 seconds real quick, and then you'll get the last word.
All right, I don't know if that's deserved, but I will say, Taylor, to your point, like just imagining a different world, I think there's all sorts of things that abolitionists and expert community organizers are doing right now. And I get pretty geeked about it. I mean, it's exciting stuff. I think, divesting from the police and pumping that money back into, communities and community programs. I think there's so much that we can do there and kind of replacing this idea of, well, I guess the way that we handle harm in our communities with ideas of transformative justice. I get pretty excited about it for sure.
All right. That's going to be the last word on this. I want to thank, first of all, our panel, a great panel, great discussion today. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and being brave enough to get on here. And I also want to thank our audience for taking time out and joining, and great conversation in the chat. A couple of things. These are happening every month on the last Saturday of the month, the last non-holiday Saturday of the month. So please join us in the future again. replays are available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. And please invite your friends. If you enjoyed this, thought it was important, please let your friends know. Repost our invites. Look at our Facebook page, like us on Facebook, follow us. And also, we're launching a new blog site this Tuesday. It'll be at www.unitixnotpolitics.com. So please come out and would love to hear your thoughts there. And also, we have a great audience here. Appreciate the support. We're always looking for panelists for additional, for our future panels. So if you're interested in adding your voice to a panel, please reach out to info@unitixnotpolitics.com and let us know of your interest, and we'll respond to you quickly. And also, if you have topics that you'd like to hear discussed on future panels, please send in those as well. Again, thank you for joining us today. It was a great discussion. Hope you all enjoyed it and took some value out of this, and hope to see you at our future ones. Thank you, everyone.